So the stage is yours, Ren. Thank you very
Thank you
much
very
for
much. Thank you very
your
much.
talk.
First, thank you. Thank you, Ute. Thank you for inviting me to speak. And let me just say that it's a special pleasure for me to be as both a member of IGPP, because I am a member of IGPP now, and also in deep philosophy, one foot here, one foot there. So it's really a pleasure. So um, since I have a very short time to speak, half an hour or less, and afterwards we'll discuss, my interest is not so much to present my own view, but more to ask a question, to ask a certain question from my perspective in a way that I think is connected to my approach, but opens the discussion for other uh, perspectives. So, the question I would like to sharpen it a little bit, the question that I would like to ask today, to ask all of us, and we will discuss it, is whether it is a good idea, whether it's important perhaps to bring into the activity of philosophical practice, any kind of philosophical practice, materials from historical philosophers. Is it important to bring maybe a text of Plato or to give a little lecture of Aristotle or Spinoza or whoever it is? Is it a good idea to bring into the session, into the activity, whether it's a counseling or whether it's some other kind of activity, materials from past philosophers? Past, I don't mean the ancient past, but also people, philosophers who lived 50 years ago or 100 years ago. So that is the question. Now, on the face of it, on the beginning, if you just look at it quickly, it seems to be a very technical question, a question of methods. Just as, is it a good idea to bring drawings to the session, to do drawings? It's a method, you can use it, you cannot use it. It's really not very important. But I think that the question about philosophical materials is much more important, and it is connected very intimately to the issue of what are the goals of philosophical practice? What are our roots, where we come from, where we get our inspiration? And also, what is really philosophical in what we are doing? Because imagine somebody coming into your activity after you finished your activity and saying somebody who doesn't know anything about philosophical practice and says, "Oh, you did philosophical practice. Very interesting. So which philosopher did you use today?" And you said, "I didn't use anyone." So I said, "Really? So is it really philosophical? So what's going on there? I thought that philosophy is about philosophy, right?" So what are we going to answer, if at all? Maybe it's a very good question. Okay. And I have to say that the reason I'm raising this question is my own personal concern. I am quite concerned about the fact that many philosophical practice activities are not connected to the history of philosophy. And I want to think, is it a good idea or a bad idea? Is it a good idea that we just forget about the past and just talk about your problems? Or is it better to use the past? So it's also something very important to me and anyone who knows my own activities, both in counseling, and I used to do a lot of counseling in the past. I don't do it anymore, but also in group activity in deep philosophy, I use a lot of texts and ideas from the past. Is it a good idea? Is it important? That's the question. So, as I said, I think it's a very important question that is intimately connected to very central issues in our field. But the question, as I formulated it, is a little bit too broad, too general, because there are many kinds of philosophical practice. And so it may be that materials from the past, from past philosophers, are a good idea for one kind of philosophical practice and not for another kind of philosophical practice. It's difficult to answer one question for every kind of philosophical practice. And so, for the sake of this conversation today, I would like to suggest three kinds of philosophical practice. Okay, to make it more precise, three kinds. I chose three kinds. One of them is philosophical practice that is oriented, that is focused on abstract, general ideas. For example, the philosophical cafe, the philo cafe, where people come and there is the question, what is justice? And everybody expresses their view and arguing or whatever. Also, Socratic dialogues maybe are like this. Okay, these are focused on an abstract question, abstract issue. Another group, the second group that we will consider, is where the focus is not an abstract issue, but a personal issue. For example, in many philosophical counseling, not every, but in many philosophical counseling, the center is some concern, some personal concern of the person, of the individual client, relationship, lack of confidence, or some skill that they don't have, social skill or whatever. So this is the second kind. Okay, so the whole session or the whole activity is focused on your personal concern to help you, whatever, maybe to feel better with that, maybe to understand better what's going on, maybe to overcome the problem, whatever it is. I'm talking about the focus, right? So the focus is idea, the focus or general issue, the focus is personal concern, and the third one, the third group that I will raise, that I suggest to bring into the conversation, is actually where I belong, where I stand, where I see myself. And this is my main interest here today, but perhaps you want to take it to other directions. And this is, these are philosophical practices that are focused on the person as a whole, not on a specific personal issue, and certainly not on an abstract issue like in the philosophical cafe, but on some kind of growth, self-development, or some dimensions that are very central to the person, such as wisdom, developing depth. Okay, the person is a. Okay, so there are, just for the sake, really it's pragmatic distinction. I'm not making a big deal out of this distinction. It's just going to help us to think together. Those activities, those philosophical practices that are focused on an issue, on an abstract issue, of philosophical issues, those that are focused on a personal issue, and those that are focused on the person as a whole. Okay, just to be able to discuss more precisely what we are talking. And now, and by the way, you can see that they are really different from each other. Although certainly there is overlap, the line is not clear. Certainly they're not the same. And you can see this when we try to cross boundaries. If in a philosophical cafe, suddenly one of the participants, maybe the question is, what is love? And he starts to tell about his love problems. And we say, hey, stop. We are in a philosophical cafe now. We are not doing counseling, right? And conversely, if in philosophical counseling, the counselor starts giving you a half an hour lecture about Plato, then, hey, come on, you're forgetting me, says the client. Well, we are talking about me, right? So these are certainly different activities, although the boundary is not clear, there is some overlap, and there may be other groups in addition to those three. So just a pragmatic distinction. Now we can ask about those three groups. Is it a good idea to bring philosophical materials? Or is it even necessary or important to bring philosophical materials from the history of philosophy into the session? Usually in the form of maybe reading together some text, or maybe a short lecture about a certain philosophy, and so on. Let's start with this first kind. Like philosophical cafe or other activities that are focused on a philosophical issue. So it is maybe surprising that many philosophical practitioners who do philosophical cafe around the world, those that I encounter, don't use material from the history of philosophy. They just bring a question, what is justice? And we talk about, or they talk about it. I don't give philosophical cafe, but I'm just saying it's surprising to me that many don't. They just come with a question and there is a discussion. And that's okay. I have no criticism here. I don't mean to criticize, but I would like to make a certain observation. And the observation is that most people, the person in the street, ordinary people, including scientists, lawyers, or people who are supposed to be smart, have very little idea about what to say about philosophical issues. If you take a person, normal person, say, "Oh, tell me, what is true love?" What are they going to say? I mean, maybe they will say, true love, it's if I really love somebody. Well, that's not an answer. Really love, that's the question, not the answer. Or they would quote something that they found on Facebook or in some movie, like, you really love somebody when you don't have to say, "I'm sorry." I heard it sometimes. Well, it's just a sentence. It means nothing. And it's superficial. It's not true. In contrast, philosophers of the past, philosophers in the past 2,600 years, developed an entire networks of ideas, distinctions, connections, arguments. Perhaps you had this experience if you studied at university when you were in first year and you had to write a paper, a work for some professor. You didn't know what to write more than one paragraph. After 20 years, if you have to write about something, you don't know how to write about it in less than 20 pages, right? That's the big difference, that you realize how rich our understanding can be in this amazing treasure of philosophy of the past. And if that is the case, then a challenge to those who give philosophical cafe is, if you don't look at the past, at what Plato said, or Nietzsche, or Spinoza, or Descartes, depending on the topic, of course, aren't you encouraging superficial thinking? Isn't that what you're doing? Because you just think that the ordinary person can spew out of their mouth some deep things, and you encourage them to think this way. And moreover, in what sense is it philosophical at all? Is it really philosophical? Well, we talk about those issues with everybody, but that's not philosophy. I chat with my hairdresser who cuts my hair also. That doesn't make it philosophy, right? So just those two challenges. I'm not making a judgment. There are challenges here. If you don't use philosophical material from the past, then are you really educating for thinking philosophically or just for superficial thinking? And in what sense are you doing something philosophical? Okay, that's enough for the first one. As I said, I want to focus on the third. Let us now switch to the second kind of philosophical practice, which is focused on personal issues. And the best example is philosophical counseling, when the client describes their issue and we talk for an hour or so about it and we meet several times and so on. And if the focus is on the philosophical issue, is it a good idea to bring materials? Let me point out that if the focus is on the personal issue, then philosophy is really only a tool. If what is important is that you will address your personal issue and be able to deal with it better, then philosophy is just a tool. Just as you can do counseling with drawings or with dancing, there is dance counseling, you can do it with philosophy. What matters is only the result. It doesn't matter if philosophy, not philosophy. It doesn't matter if we say we speak philosophically in a stupid way. It doesn't really matter. The main thing is, he feels better at the end, or he's empowered to do certain things, or the result is what matters. So the challenge here is, are you really doing philosophy? If your main interest is the result of the personal issue, then is this really philosophy? Because philosophy really doesn't matter. It's just a tool. It's only a tool for something else. Bring in the history of philosophy, or don't if you don't want, but why is it philosophy? It sounds more like therapy that uses philosophy as opposed to philosophical, really a philosophy conversation. Now, I'm not saying this is a final statement. I'm just saying that this is a challenge. This is a challenge to the philosophical counselor to respond to that. Okay, so I'm not making any judgment. This is a challenge that the philosophical counselor has to address. All right, and now let's get to the real thing. For me, the real issue that I wanted to talk with you, and this is those philosophical practices that are focused on the entire person, on the person, or some very central dimension in the person, such as wisdom or some kind of growth, development. And this is what I do in deep philosophy and what possibly some of you do. And of course, there are many approaches there. But is it a good idea to bring philosophical materials, to bring text, as we do in deep philosophy? Every session we use a text of about 1 to 2 pages. Or you can summarize, you don't have to read, you can summarize it, give a lecture or whatever, with the purpose of somehow developing the person. Now, this is really, I think, this is the interesting issue for me, because the others are clear. Now, on the face of it, in a first look, you can say, what's the connection between personal growth, wisdom, and learning some theory? Right? If you teach me a theory of Aristotle, what does it have to do with wisdom, with depth, with being a bigger person? It's just another theory, just as I learned some theory in biology or theory in physics. So now I know a theory in philosophy has nothing to do with wisdom, with expansion, with being a better person, fuller person. So on the surface, there seems no connection at all between learning philosophical ideas from the past and growth, self-growth, wisdom, and so on. But I would like to suggest that this kind of answer misses something very important about what philosophical ideas can do in us. It's a misunderstanding of the power of philosophical ideas. And this power of philosophical ideas is what I'd like to talk with you about. For me, it's the most interesting thing. Because those who say, if somebody says that, hey, a philosophical idea is just a theory, and a theory doesn't make any difference to you, you understand it in your head, and then you can be any kind of person. It doesn't influence you at all. It's just a possession, just some idea that you possess. So it's interesting, but it's not more than interesting. And those who speak like this think of a philosophical idea as a fixed thing that is really informational. There is some information about some sentences or some statements or some concepts. And the philosophical theory is presumably a representation of reality, right? What is a theory? A theory is a map of reality, a picture of reality. When you have a theory of biology, it is, let me tell you that the cells in your body are ABC. Okay, so this is, and if it corresponds correctly, it's a true theory. If it doesn't, it's a false theory. Very simple. The same thing about philosophical theories. Theory about love, theory about the self, theory about freedom. Either it's true or false. There is nothing much to do it. It's a thing, a separate thing, an atom, right? A separate thing. But to see that this is a misleading picture, to see that philosophical idea can do much more than that, think about moments where you were inspired by some philosophical idea. Some philosophical idea touched you and inspired you. And what happened then? Maybe you, for 15 minutes, you walked around and it touched you and you wrote down some ideas and so on. Think about this time, this being touched by a philosophical idea. The interesting thing is you did not treat the idea as a fixed, finished theory that is for the mind. Rather, the idea resonated in you. it resonated in you, and it aroused other meanings or ideas that are not directly connected and rearrange things in your mind. This kind of resonating thinking is also known in psychology. It's well known in psychology in various kinds of experiments that when your mind is primed, as they say, in the concept says primed, is triggered, right, by an idea, then all kinds of reverberations, echoes, resonating can happen. And new connections, new meanings can arouse. There are very interesting psychological experiments about it. Even very simple ones, such as if I constantly expose you to words that are connected to old age, that Karen mentioned to old age, then for the next half an hour, I'm going to behave a little bit like this. I'm going to think about old age, right? So in the same way, a philosophical idea has an immense power that is much beyond the theory. I call it's a voice that resonates. And this means that we have here a different kind of thinking that is not your ordinary academic logical thinking. Normally in academic thinking, or when normally in everyday life, we think in a linear way. This follows this way. And here we have a horizontal kind of parallel way. All kinds of ideas rush in my mind in the moment of deep understanding. Usually we think about it as monophonic. It's one voice, one thing that is it. But if you are in this more contemplative or resonating way, it's a polyphonic kind of many meanings play in your mind, and some of them contradict each other. And that's okay. You don't say, hey, there must be a logical connection. It's not beyond logic. It's all kinds of meanings and connections that are part of your thinking. Usually we think in a very atomistic and analytic way. We have pieces of elements of ideas that come together. But in this inspired way of thinking, ideas are connected to others. They are relational. What happens here is really a network of ideas, a network of meanings that is part of the world, part of my world. And my entire network of meanings gets moved and readjusted. Also, normally, when we think about ideas, not just in philosophy, also in politics or science, we think about the explicit, the visible, what we can see, A, B, C. But in this kind of resonating thinking, resonating understanding, then there are many hidden meanings there that we are not totally aware, just that things are connected. Just as when we read a poem in poetry, different images and they connect together in ways that we are not entirely sure how, right? It's a little bit similar to poetic thinking, that we see the connections in very implicit, not visible, hidden ways. And another interesting thing is if you have a theory, it's a static product. Whereas here we have a generative kind of understanding. What you understand generates new things and new associations as long as this understanding takes place. Let me mention one more thing, but really we can talk, you can say an entire big lecture about what this other way of thinking is. And this is, in this theoretical way of thinking, this information, you possess your knowledge. Here it is in my mind. I can see, the metaphor is seeing. You can see the theory just as you see the word. It's over there, I can see. Whereas in this kind of resonating or contemplative understanding, you immerse in it, you participate in it. You are part of it. And listening is a much better metaphor. You listen to those many meanings. To summarize this very long topic, but I want to summarize it quickly, what we have here is two different ways of understanding. two different states of minds. They require different states of mind. One is analytic, monophonic, linear, logical. It's explicit. What's on the table, it's on the table, static. And the other one is a kind of resonating, multi-directional, hidden meanings that becomes rearranged in my mind. Let me say that it doesn't happen automatically. It's very important that in order to have this kind of understanding, you have to prepare yourself. And this kind of preparation is what we do in deep philosophy through exercises of contemplation, but I'm sure that there are other ways of doing it. You have to be in this kind of poetic, this listening mode, as opposed to seeing focused way of doing it. And so it's a philosophical practice session that wants this kind of understanding will help to create the right atmosphere and the right exercises so that this other kind of thinking, this, let's call it the second way of thinking, will come to the fore. Now, what happens if I do it? Is it a good idea to do it? So the point is that bring philosophical materials, and these philosophical materials are not just theories, they are voices that reverberate in me with the help of maybe kind of contemplation or opening myself and so on. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Well, let me suggest that there is a deep connection between this kind of thinking and wisdom. Philosophy is about wisdom, philosophia, the love of wisdom. Because what is a wise person? Think about a wise person. You can imagine somebody that you'd say, oh, that's a wise woman, or that's a wise man. Or as I sometimes put it, if you were a film director, a movie director, and you wanted to have one of your characters is a wise man, you want to present him as a wise man, how would you build his character to make him seem wise? What is a wise person? Certainly not somebody who knows a lot, who has a lot of information. You can be quite silly, quite not non-wise, and know a lot of things. Certainly not quick in your thoughts, clever, sharp. That's not the point either. I would say it is someone who is in a rich world, somebody who walks in a big, rich world that is full of meanings, many of them implicit. Of course, it's not some theoretical thing. And that's why we can see very simple people who may be very wise. It's people who have a rich world or many voices, as I would say. And so developing our ability to sense, to taste those many voices of human reality is intimately connected to growth and wisdom. Your world is bigger now, is richer now. It's more dense with meaning. So what I suggest is then, to summarize the third kind of philosophical practice activity, is that if you focus on the person as a whole, then philosophical ideas from the past, a page from Spinoza, 2 pages from, I don't know, from Schlegel, Friedrich Schlegel, half a page from Plato, and so on. If you can open yourself, if you can prepare, have some preparation, and to be able to sense and listen to those many meanings, is a very important material. And without that, I don't know how you develop wisdom. I don't know. Or at least not in a philosophical way. How else would you use philosophy for wisdom? What, you accumulate knowledge? So your encyclopedia of who said what? No. So my suggestion is this kind of other type of understanding, this resonation, can be aroused, can be awakened with philosophical ideas from the past if you use the right state of mind. Why philosophers from the past? Why not ask Ute to write a few passages and do this? Ute, I like her a lot and she's very smart, but the 2,600 years of history produced a wealth of understanding. And so it goes much beyond a single person. We have rich understanding. That is going, I think, to create this kind of reverberation, this richness of connections, of meanings, of voices that will help me grow as a person and as a wise person. So to summarize everything that I said, I looked at three kinds of philosophical practice, and it seems that each one of them has different directions, different perspectives to philosophical ideas of the past. If it's the first one, when we look at philosophical ideas, that's philosophical issues, then maybe it's a good idea to use philosophical materials just to think more deeply than the person in the street, to do something philosophical. If it's a second that all you care about is to make your client feel better, maybe philosophical ideas are not important, but then why is it philosophical? And if it's the third, I think it's very important to use philosophical ideas in this special way of a different state of mind, a different way of understanding. We do it in deep philosophy in a certain way. I'm sure that it's not the only way. There are probably many other ways to think in this different way of thinking about the past, and in this way to enrich ourselves and to grow in wisdom. I will stop here now, and I invite anyone who wants to participate in this. I really gave only a beginning. I didn't give any dogma or any theory. And now it's a time to talk about. So the microphone is back to you, Ute.
Yes, thank you very much, Ran, for your really very interesting talk.